Hey there, folks! So, balance in Team Fortress 2. A fickle subject that we as a community have been discussing for a very long time, and will continue to do until there are no players left. But, in the current moment, between major updates, I think that this may be as good a time as any to start tossing around our ideas on what we could see change about Team Fortress 2, and how it could be better balanced around all levels of play. With that being said, this is me throwing my hat into the amassed cesspool of ideas that we're calling a ring. I'll be covering around 40 weapons across all 9 classes, and rounding it off with some general changes and map fixes I wouldn't mind seeing. Due to the nature of how I'm doing this, I'm also going to say that this is going to be a little long-winded, so feel free to throw this on in the background while you go stomp a pub or something. Also, due to how I'm doing this, I'll probably only be talking about 2 or 3 classes per video. This one in particular, I'll be talking about Scout and Soldier. Of course, before I get into things, I would like to be completely transparent about my place in the community and the fact that everything in this video is mainly opinion-based. Starting with the typical unimportant stuff, I am by no means a game developer, nor do I believe that the things I am suggesting are to be held as gospel. This is a conversation, so work back and forth with me here. I'm also not a top-tier competitive player, so my ideas may not be balanced for the highest level of play, which is something I do want to avoid. In the event of people wishing to call me unbiased, by the way, which I wouldn't blame anyone for, here are my hours on each of the 9 classes, as well as my total playtime, which can be tracked back to just before Pyromania. Please note that my favorite classes are Engineer and Heavy, while my least favorite are Soldier and Demo. So, without further ado, let's get into it. We're getting the biggest of the bunch out of the way first. Scout is an incredibly tricky class to balance between his speed, his damage, his double jump, how powerful all of his weapons have been over time. It's insane. As it stands right now, however, I think Scout has a lot of weapons that are underperforming. So, let's take a look at them. Let's start with the one everyone seems to forget. The Shortstop is currently suffering a pretty bad identity crisis, in my opinion. I can't recall the weapon ever really having a dedicated purpose in the game other than how it used to be the "don't use this with pistols" weapon. And I mean, I guess the weapon's gimmick right now could be a mid-range scattergun replacement, and it does that to an acceptable margin, but it isn't enough to make it a decent side grade. And let's be honest, who actually uses the shove? Yeah! Like, it's just a way worse air blast when you get down to it, and since you can't use it while you're reloading, most people won't be able to utilize it unless they have a full clip since they have auto-reload on. So, here's what I propose. Giving the Shortstop a clear-cut identity revolving around mid-range play. To start, let's get rid of the shove and the extra knockback, since both of these statistics are negligible at best and could help the Scout to achieve his effective range without too much effort. In addition, having the weapon's actual stats listed may help people know better what they're getting into with this weapon. Now, to balance this around mid-range play, let's start with the upsides by allowing the weapon to be more consistent at mid-range. I propose this be done by having the weapon have a fixed 2x2 spread, rather than the weird T pattern that it has right now when random bullet spread is disabled. I know a large number of people think that random bullet spread is slightly obnoxious, though nowhere near as painfully annoying as random crits. So maybe this could make the weapon more used until they get around to giving the people what they want and disabling those mechanics. In conjunction with this, the Shortstop could be made a fair bit more unique if we were to have a modified system of damage ramp up. My suggestion is to have it do base damage at point blank, but to ramp up at mid-range. This could be a bit tricky to create and balance around though, so this may not be a decision worth striving for. As a final decision to balance around the Scout not needing to risk his life by getting in close as much, I'd say lowering the Scout's maximum health by 15 could be a fair trade-off. As a last little thing, could we please make it so the bullets don't hide in the Scout's chin the entire time at higher FOVs? Please? It's pretty unanimous at this rate that the Babyface's blaster needs a buff right now, though we do need to be careful suggesting buffs for the weapon due to the hitbox bug it's so infamous for. If the weapon's balance was as simple as fixing the hitbox, Valve would have probably fixed it already, so we may have to discuss this with the mindset that we are doomed to deal with that bug forever. With that being said, however, I've got 2 suggestions for the weapon if the hitbox could not be fixed, and 1 for if it could be fixed. Let's start with the more realistic side. Assuming the hitbox bug could not be fixed. Both of these are very minor changes, replacing the infuriating damage removes boost statistic, and also increasing the amount of damage needed to reach max boost by a good amount. The first one changes it to an anti-regen effect that requires the Scout to keep working for his boost by draining it when out of combat. I was thinking that somewhere between 2 to 10% drain after 3 to 5 seconds out of combat could work for this. The second simply makes it so the scout takes more damage as his boost increases. I was thinking around 25% could be fair, since that puts him within the threshold of dying to a single well-placed rocket, pill, or sticky, though it could be justified to fiddle with this number a bit. Now let's jump the fence and assume the hitbox bug could be fixed. In this case, a simple reversion of the controversial change could be justified, but I also wouldn't mind seeing a more bold change be implemented. The bold change I have in mind starts the scout off at the 87% movement speed he had when the weapon first came out, but it doesn't punish him for double jumping. Instead, his basic double jumping ability is straight up disabled. This makes the weapon more focused on literal hit and run tactics and utilizing more traditional routes. I should note that I don't think it should affect the Atomizer's weapon ability, since it is required to be held out to be used, giving those two weapons an interesting synergy. Before moving on, I just want to say that if there were any weapon I want my biases called on, it's this weapon right here. Movement is a thrilling mechanic in video games, and this weapon is one of my favorite examples of that. I mean, if it weren't for movement mechanics, I don't think Soldier would be my most played class. I've got two very basic ideas when it comes to the Pretty Boy's pocket pistol. Right now, the health gain on hit is very underwhelming, so if that's the focus they want the weapon to have, they're going to need to increase how much Scout gets per hit. 3 isn't very much, and even buffing it to the 5 or so that I was thinking would probably be pretty underwhelming still, and knowing Valve, if it were to give more health, a further clip size reduction would be inevitable. I think the idea everyone has and wants to see, however, is turning the pocket pistol back into a fall damage negator. I personally would like to see this so it can once again synergize with its item set partner, the Babyface's blaster, but I do think it should be kept to how it was, requiring it to be held out to do its job. So here's my version. To start, it draws 25% faster, allowing the scout to negate fall damage readily with quick reactions. However, to negate these powerful effects, it would holster 50% slower, and, while active, and until the scout has fully drawn his other weapon, he will find himself taking 50% more damage. This makes the weapon very clearly cut as a utility weapon, and makes the scout need to think seriously before whipping it out as a sidearm. The Guillotine isn't in the greatest place right now simply because it doesn't really do reliable damage when compared to the pistol, and doesn't provide the utility of something like the Mad Milk or the Winger. Considering the Sandman doesn't stun anymore, I don't think it'd be a terrible idea if it was reverted to a combo weapon, but at the same time I think having the weapon's mass damage come into play less often might prevent it from being such a menace. For starters, given the short cooldown period already, the reduced cooldown stat is pretty much pointless, especially since there's a max range for the weapon for some reason. So besides removing that, I think it'd be nice to have it do crits at long range. This rewards the scout for hitting precise cleavers, and it would, in particular, punish snipers for standing completely still, which I'm all for. Okay, so the Sandman. I actually have no clue what could be done with this thing. Like, okay, obviously we can't revert it since pretty much everyone hates the stun mechanic, which is fair, I understand that. But at the same time, the slow drop by the Sandman ball barely affects 2 of the 9 classes at all. For those who don't know, the modern Sandman slows any class affected by it to about 225 hammer units a second, or roughly 75% movement speed. This means that the Heavy and Soldier get slowed by less than 5%. Also, since Soldier is one of the most popular classes in the game, the fact that this barely touches him at all is really awful, especially when taking into account that he can just rocket jump to offset the negligible speed loss anyway. I suppose that it's pretty good against Scouts and Demo Knights, especially since the latter loses out on their charge ability when slowed, but the fact that this is only greatly useful against a few particular classes, while not much more than a nuisance against others, is pretty underwhelming. If you have any suggestions as to what could be done for the Sandman, or would just like to explain to me in a very well scripted manner why the Sandman is secretly the best unlock in the game right now, please feel free to do so down in the comments. Now, I'm probably in the boat of a very small minority that thinks the Atomizer needs a buff in any fashion, but I think its current setup of having a longer draw time is rather counterintuitive for needing to have it out to use its ability. So I think that trading it out to a longer holster speed time could be more warranted, and maybe doubling it in tandem. I also thought that giving it an effect to cause enemies to go straight down if they're airborne could be interesting in a Smash Bros sort of way, and it would definitely make Scout a bigger threat to Trollers. But if that stat was to be added, I'd say that doubling the damage penalty or removing the mini crits would be more than warranted to offset the damage that would be getting caused from cratering. So the Rap Assassin is rather underwhelming, and I think that has basically always been the case. In its own right, it really only exists to turn the Scout into a mosquito. Now, I don't have any major suggestions to fix this, but I think a small buff in how the bleed works, while also giving it a long-range reward for hitting those moonshot bobbles, could be justified. My suggestion would be to have the bleed time be determined by the distance between the Scout and the target, similar to how the Sandman works, and for the moonshots, have the bobble and the bleed mini-crit. Since bleed is a fairly underwhelming effect that can be instantly remedied by many different things, I think having 8 seconds of 4 to 5 damage a tick bleed is a bit more of a reason to use this weapon. Also, as a side note, go take a look at the video I made regarding the Rap Assassin on Badwater Basin. It could really use a fix. Okay, so it goes without saying that the Sun on a Stick is one of the least useful weapons in the game. It needs a buff of some form, and we all know this. So let me toss out 2 different suggestions. Both replace the current fire resistance statistic and implement a new random crits one, since it should probably have that anyways. The first is a pretty common suggestion of making the Sun on a Stick ignite its victim after landing consecutive attacks, similar to how the Gunslinger works. This allows the Scout to utilize the weapon without needing to have an open communication with a friendly pyro, and without needing to stick to his ass. The other is a more unique one, adding 2 new stats. The first makes it so that if the Scout is on fire, he can strike an opponent to transfer his remaining afterburn to that target. To counter this, however, the Scout would have Afterburn last 50% longer on him. He could utilize this to set enemies on fire for longer, but it also punishes him for not seeking out an opponent to ignite. As it stands, by nerfing a large number of Scouts unlocks, he is the most balanced he has ever been, but this makes it so he has a pretty low number of viable weapons, which I would like to see change. A few weapons I want to close off on by discussing are the Soda Popper, Bonk, and Criticola. The Soda Popper is incredibly powerful, allowing for a higher damage potential than stock. That being said, however, I don't think it's an outright better weapon than stock, due to the clip size and it relying on damn near perfect accuracy. The Bonk, while I initially disliked its change, I can see why it was implemented now, since there wasn't really any punishment for the Scout using it to bypass something that would otherwise kill him. The Criticola is infamously the most busted Scout unlock, but with where it's at right now, I think even if it were to need one more nerf to be perfectly balanced, it doesn't feel abusive to use or to have used it against you anymore. As much as people like to joke about there being an ungodly number of spy and sniper mains, I think the most vocal majority of the game's player base owes loyalty to the powerful, fun, and fast-paced Soldier. And it definitely shows in the majority of his weapons, as there are almost no weapons that are unbalanced in the Soldier's arsenal. However, I did elect to say almost, so let me touch on the few weapons I think need to see some changes. Most Soldier mains from back in the day could probably say that they really enjoy the Liberty Launcher, due to the power that it once bestowed. However, following the nerfs it received some time ago, it's now not much more than an underwhelming hodgepodge of random statistics that doesn't see very much use, which I find disappointing. So, as a small suggestion, I would elect to have the Liberty Launcher be a degreaser of sorts for Soldier, allowing him to trade off the versatility of his rocket launcher by allowing him to combo better with his other weapons. It's a rather niche idea and would probably not be competitively viable, but I don't think every weapon would be anyway. The particular reason I would like to see this happen is so the weapon could better pair with its weapon set, the Airborne Armaments. It already pairs great with the Market Gardener due to the reduced rocket jump damage, so I think trading out the extra rocket for about 50% extra knockback could make it pair great with the other set weapon, the Reserve Shooter. Revert the Bison. That's it. Just revert the Bison. Like, I don't know why that hasn't happened yet. I'll leave it to Soundsmith to explain why it needs to happen. A link in the description to that video, but just like, Jesus Christ, please, Valve. Soldier is a damn good class, and I think that's honestly why he's so popular. And while he may not be my favorite class to play, I can accredit his solid balancing and fun as hell gameplay to the success he has as a class. I want to quickly touch on the Black Box and Conch, since they're an incredibly controversial pair. I think the two, especially in conjunction, have their niche by trading off damage for survivability. Soldier's rocket launcher is slow and cumbersome, and without the gunboats, the Soldier will have to commit more using this pair, or will be defensive and not be as problematic. I don't really hold sympathy for people claiming this combo to be overpowered, since it really just comes down to dodging and taking advantage of his low rate of fire. Other than that, I wouldn't mind seeing the Rocket Jumper Conch bug being fixed. You know, the one that makes it so using the Rocket Jumper resets the Conch's regen? It's a minor bug, but it's a bug nonetheless. Anyway, that's Scout and Soldier done, so in the next video I'll be covering Pyro and Demo. If I have time for it in the video, I'll also do Heavy. I had a hell of a lot of fun making this video, so if you'd like to stick around to see more, and show me some support, it'd be greatly appreciated. Thank you all very much for watching. Have a good one. Both of these are very minor changes, replacing the infuriating damage removes boost statistic, while also releasing? What the fuck is a release?